Hello and welcome to a special conference edition of Craft Politics. I'm Holly Mumby-Croft and he's Andrew Percy. And this week we're flying solo because Joseph's away working hard somewhere. It's going to be a little bit like when your parents go out of town and you invite your friends over for a party. Not something Andrew will probably know anything about. Joseph is currently sitting in a boardroom somewhere with his little finger twitching, wishing he hadn't given us the passwords. Don't worry, Joseph, we're going to take this really seriously. I've even put a bra on. We are joined this week by a very good friend of Andrew's.
Just hang on 1 second then. So Joseph isn't dead. He's actually just I thought when you said someone told me he's not with us anymore. And I thought he'd maybe passed on, but he's actually just working.
You think he's working? I mean, I don't know, Andrew. I think he's working. I think he's probably wearing a suit. He's sitting somewhere important. He's, work stuff.
He's probably doing a 10-mile run as well or something like that because he's pathetic. But anyway, we'll miss him and nor will anybody listening, to be honest. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
But it doesn't matter because we've got all the passwords for all the platforms. It's absolutely... And I should say at this point as well, a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed over the last week. Joseph sent us some figures over the last couple of days, so I can only assume that massive boost is down to me. If you don't already subscribe, please do so. It is free and it really helps us. And the other thing is, if you can recommend the podcast to friends and family that you think might enjoy it, we'd be really grateful for that. And go back and ask them some questions afterwards and check if they really do like you and they really have took your advice and listened to the podcast. Because if they have, they'll know the answers to those questions. And now it's time to say hello to our lovely guest. We are joined this week by former member of the British Parliament, Antony Higginbotham. Antony's been at party conference, the Conservative Party Conference this week. Antony's a very good friend of mine and Andrew's as well. Antony, who would you say is a better friend to you out of me and Andrew?
You know what, Holly? I should probably have anticipated that question when I agreed to come on the podcast. I'm going to say that you both have great traits because having just been at party conference, I've rediscovered the art of not answering any questions.
Yeah, you've gone right back into politician mode. It's remarkable.
Never left it. We should also, it's very good to join us, Anthony, but I should also explain to Canadian listeners what party conference is. In Canada, we have a thing called party conventions where, the parties get together now and again and have these, the conventions. In the UK, we call it party conference season, doing it like that. And all the parties have them in a row. So 1 week's Liberal, then Labour, then Conservative. That's normally the route. That's normally the timing. Conservatives always go last. And SNP, Reform have conferences as well. And it used to be that everyone went away to the seaside and you went to Bournemouth or Brighton or Blackpool and you'd stay in these B&Bs for £10 a night or £20 a night and you'd get a full breakfast from the landlady who might still be drunk. And it was everyone goes away to the sea and the party has all its set piece speeches, leader, senior members. So occasionally discuss policy, not really in the Conservative Party. We don't like to really do that. But now they're tend to be held in Birmingham, Manchester because of hotel rooms and all the rest of it. And the spaces that are required. But it's a bit of Parliament goes into recess and everyone just knows it as party conference season, right? Journalists all trot up there to look for stories of drunk MPs and all the rest of it and gossip. But it's normally a heady week of everyone getting together, getting very drunk, staying up very late and occasionally saying very silly things that get them into national newspapers.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think that's fair.
And the best bit about this conference is the journalists are clearly so worried that members of Parliament aren't getting drunk with them that Politico actually established their own pub in the middle of the conference venue.
Extremely proactive. I'm quite impressed with that. Anthony, can you tell us, just from a point for the Canadian listeners, for the US listeners and listeners who may never have been to conference, what's a kind of typical day like from getting there in the morning? Presumably the security is as it ever was, and getting onto the site. What would greet you at the other side of that security procedure?
Yeah, it was. So I think back to all the conferences I went to when we were in government, and basically you turned up and there was just reams of protesters outside jumping up about any issue you could imagine. There was groups of protesters there, and weirdly, this conference, probably to be expected given where we are, there wasn't a single protester at any of the entrances, which I think tells you something about where British politics is at the minute, because there was definitely protesters at Labour conference. There was definitely protesters at Reform Party conference. I think there was one person stood outside with a sign that said pedestrianise the M6, which, for those who don't know, is just a motorway. And that was it.
So you never got spat on then, this conference?
No spitting on, no scare. I remember one year going to Tory Party Conference, and on a bridge, it was in Manchester, there was a scarecrow hanging off the bridge with a Tory badge on, which I thought was very creative, but nothing like that this year. So maybe people like us again.
Maybe. How about the attendance levels compared to previous years?
Well, as we walked in on the first day, you're kind of figuring out where the entrances are. And we said to one of the security guards, is this an entrance for general people? He said, you can use any of them. There's nobody here. They've all got in the dinghies and gone off to Reform Pal. Which I thought, well, given that's the security guard who's letting us in, it was definitely quite, no doubt about it, it was a lot quieter than any conference I've ever been to. But there was still a decent number of people there. It's not, you look on X and stuff, and certainly Reform politicians who have posted about it want you to believe that the conference hall was empty all the time. There was nobody there. It wasn't like that. Like, it was still busy, but it was noticeably less busy than every other year I've been there. Which I think reflects a couple of things. One, we are just less relevant. So if you're a business, we used to get businesses and lobbyists and everyone saying that, well, we're just not the party of government and we're not going to be for a while now. So there's far less incentive to spend the thousands of pounds that would have cost to do it. And if you're a normal member, you're just a bit demotivated. So why would you want to be there?
Yeah, and I think it's to be expected, right, that the year after you've lost an election, the first conference afterwards is always a bit of a buzz because it's who's going to be the new leader. Yeah. So maybe it's not unnatural that, this would be the year where you'd have the worst attendance because you're 4 years from a general election. However, it does seem that, and obviously the narrative is everything's going away from the Tories, it's all about reform, so people are naturally going to probably write that before even the conference started. In fact, there could have probably been thousands of extra people there and somebody would still have written something about that. However, a lot of people who've attended very many conferences, even in opposition, and have seen, journalists who've attended Labour conferences when they are in opposition, have commented on how this did feel a bit like a wake and, as if the party is in a existential kind of crisis, which obviously we know it is. So I'm just intrigued to, also for the context of people who don't follow UK politics, like the current polling has the Conservative Party about 15 to 20% in the polls, the Labour Party and Party of Government obviously not far from that either, which obviously is unusual because normally the opposition party would be benefiting from that. Do you think members and members of Parliament, the ones that are still there and that still survive, do you think they, are they in denial? Do they think the party's over? Or are there people who still are genuinely of the belief that the Tories will come back?
I think there's two camps. So of everyone I spoke to, they almost uniformly went into one of those extreme camps. There was the ones who went, it's basically all over. There's nothing we can do. We're almost on, this is the last hurrah where we all just get together and have a nice time. And they were quite happy to go around and tell everyone who would listen that that's what they thought. And then there was the ones who, to give them, their fair dues, were going around admitting that there is a problem, but viewed this conference as the start of a policy fight back. And actually, you did see that from some of the shadow cabinet speeches on the main stage and at the fringes, that they were really keen to start explaining what policy would look like, either in very specific detail. It was the first conference I've been to when they were giving out booklets, and I mean thick booklets, on specific policy proposals. So there was a whole booklet on borders, a whole booklet on crime and policing, a whole one on housing. And I think that tells you about where some of the shadow cabinet are. But there were others who were just quite happy to stand up and say, we're just going to be the party that supports X group. And I think those who are on the more serious end are trying to do the legwork, but there's also those who are resting on their laurels.
It kind of struck me as a bit weird that we started off party conference with this pledge about getting rid of throwing out, deporting 750,000 illegal immigrants. Like, the one thing we absolutely failed to do when we were in government was sort out the borders, sort out immigration. It's obviously an issue where you can never out-reform reform. So it just seemed a bit weird that we would kick off conference. And I think the current leader has made some very bizarre choices over the last year or two, and things she's talked about, the way she's presented, some of the policies. But even for her, it seemed a little bit bizarre that we would start on, even though it's obviously, I understand it's the number one issue for the public, or one of the top one or two issues for the public, but nobody believes the Conservatives on immigration. So why start with a pledge that is just going to be, if anybody is listening, which I don't think that many people were, they would just think, well, why am I going to trust them guys? They didn't sort out when they were in government. It just seemed weird, right?
Yeah, and that was definitely a recurring theme, the trust piece of people are hearing that we're saying things about immigration, but they still have absolutely no belief that we will deliver any of it. That came across in every fringe meeting where it was spoken about. The central tenet was, we've got to get people to trust that we'll do what we say, not just that we will say these things. But interesting, there was polling. The Spectator released a poll during conference that actually said most people believe that we've still got general election wins in us as a political party. So the public don't trust us necessarily, but they also don't trust any other party, and they still believe that there's fight left in the party. I think that shows the oddity of British politics at the minute and the disillusion that most people have.
Do you think as well, Anthony, part of that is to do with the people who are involved? And for a lot of people, they can kind of think back to what in their mind may be the heyday of the Conservative Party. They can think forward potentially to a point in the future where it may be under different leadership, it may be making some slightly different moves, and that they're seeing the party as separate to the current people who are running it.
Maybe. I think I had a conversation with someone and we tried to put it in like corporate terms. And like you'll find a company that basically goes bankrupt. It's down and out and it's a fire sale. And the only thing that has any value is the actual brand name, even though nobody shops there, nobody's used it for decades. But someone will still come up and just buy the brand and the website title and go, well, we'll revitalize it in a few years. It almost feels like that's where we are. That people don't trust the people, the policies. They don't trust any of that. But the brand still has something because of that institutional memory that people go, you're probably still worth something at some point. I'm just not willing to give you the chance right now.
We're the Woolworths of British politics then.
Yeah.
Is that right then? So we're like Woolworths. We're going to be dragged back because people will fondly remember the pick and mix and think, I want a bit of that again. I just don't want, Debbie who used to work on the pick and mix serving. I want like somebody new.
Yeah.
When the shadow ministers were speaking, I mean, it feels like they've tried to pivot over the second half of the conference onto this economy stuff and Kemi Badenoch's golden rule and all of that. Was that putting through actually on the ground? Were people talking about this stuff?
No, not really. So the two messages of every conference always has a strap line. We've had you'll remember far more than me, Andrew, but I remember Boris's post-COVID was Build Back Better. This one was stronger borders, stronger economy. And you kind of go, well, stronger than what? Because what we're actually saying is stronger borders than what we as a party delivered, stronger economy than what we as a party delivered. And that is a really tough message to take. But I think it is part of Kemi's rebuild trust, admit the mistakes and move forward. I just don't know whether it will work because there is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. Like if you keep telling people you got stuff wrong, they're never going to get back to that point of trusting you again.
Yeah, the trust thing is interesting because what I just find really bizarre at the moment is you watch people who by the way, did you like the way I effortlessly got up to close the window and nobody noticed because I was so smooth in doing it? But I didn't realize there was lots of noise, and Joseph, when he edits this, if he's still with us, will get really annoyed that there was lots of noise outside. So that's my gift to him.
I really hope he is, Andrew, because I don't think we're up to editing this.
I mean, this will just go out as the hot mess that it is, right? Of just like me standing up saying, is it on? Anyway, I think the really insightful point I was making was that I've seen like people who are shadow ministers, of which I think everybody is now a shadow minister in about 10 different jobs because there aren't enough Tory MPs prepared to do it, to cover all the bases. But they're standing up now and saying, I'm railing against things like net zero, and they're railing against a whole range of things that that actually 18 months ago, whatever it was when we were in power, they were standing up and defending. And there just seems to be this like massive credibility thing because we haven't really got new faces. It's the same people who are still there who were obviously senior ministers or MPs, at least in the last parliament. And they're now, I don't believe them when they say, we're now against net zero. Because I remember you when you were a minister in that very department responsible for that policy, defending it. It's just like this whole credibility thing. And that, I suppose the problem that the Tory party has perhaps is we don't have a generational change, do we? Because there just don't seem to be new faces.
Yeah.
So it's the same people who were just 18 months, 2 years ago, defending the very things they are now railing against. And I don't know what the answer to that when you've only got 120 MPs and you can't really, there's not a lot of new people. I think 30 new MPs came in. But, was there anybody who, to that point, I suppose, who of new MPs, who kind of excited conference? I remember going when David Cameron was a new MP, before he was leader, any of that, but he was a new MP and he spoke a lot of things and people were like, oh, he looks like it could be good for the future. Was there any sense of that at all?
Yes, the new intake of MPs are definitely very ambitious, very clear to distance themselves from the party's past mistakes.
So from me, you and Holly.
Basically, yeah. And you can, the way you can tell that business and lobby groups are listening to them a lot is they're on all the panels. All of the panels, bar a couple, had a new intake. And as you said, there's not that many of them. There was not that many new Conservative MPs elected for the first time in 2024, but they were getting around the media studios, the fringe events. Almost any fringe event on immigration had one of the new intake on. Now, they also would have someone like Chris Philp on to talk about from a Home Office perspective, but the ones where meaty policy was discussed was people like Katie Lamb and Jack Rankin and people who are making a name for themselves in Parliament and using social media to arguably get more traction than the main party can currently get.
So who should we be watching there? I mean, you mentioned two names then. Katie Lamb I hear quite a lot, quite often. And, is a lot of buzz around her?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of buzz around Katie Lamb. And her views on immigration, one, resonate with the party base. Two, I think are pretty much in step with where the public is. And three, I think are broadly in line with where Kemi and Kemi wants the party to get to, which then poses questions. But why were those people not more prominent in the main party program? If that's the image we're trying to rebuild, why not put those people on the main stage? Obviously, they're not going to get a Secretary of State spot, but we all know the main stage is nothing's going on most of the time. So why not say, right, okay, we're happy to let our backbenchers who are crafting this new image, who are talking about things that it is more difficult for those who have been elected in previous parliaments to talk about. You go and do it. You go and sell the message. And it helps boost the profile. I had this conversation with someone that we all served with and said, part of the problem is everything was too tightly controlled. But too tightly controlled in the way when we were there, no one in government wanted to go on the media and defend anything because there was a lot of things that were indefensible. But also they didn't want anyone else going and defending anything because they didn't know what you'd say. And you go, well, that left a massive void. That void has existed for the last year, which is why Reform have been able to march ahead as high as it is. But there's still a nervousness in the party about letting those backbenchers have big slots and big roles.
I think maybe that's changed a little bit as well, because I remember lots of occasions when it almost felt like whether it was getting people to go out into the media and defend stuff, whether it was getting people to do parliamentary secretary jobs, whether it was getting people to take roles on committees, like it was almost like a lot of colleagues just sort of stepped back, entrenched into their own areas, entrenched into their constituencies, got on with the work of being MPs. But as regards that more public-facing stuff, I know there was lots of times when I just said, no, I'm not doing that. And as you and I may well have said about the HS2 Select Committee, had it not been chaired by our very good friend Andrew Percy, where we served, what did we do, 2 days a week, most of the day? I mean, people were just saying no. So I wonder if these newer MPs are in a different mindset on saying yes to stuff.
Or is it that they are saying no to, for want of a better word, Tory high command and saying we're going to be more independently minded because we don't trust that the public are with you. We think we're more in tune with them. You asked for another name, Nick Timothy. Nick Timothy, who was Chief of Staff to Theresa May, arguably has had a really good rehabilitation from the reputation he got post 2017 election and the manifesto that came from it. Now he's one of the leading voices of the new Conservative Party, if we can call it that.
It may also be that, the leadership, leadership always tries to snuff out ambition, right? Because it's a threat to them. Yeah. So, there's a lot of talk about, or certainly in, journalists and, in political chitter-chatter about Kemi's leadership. Was that on display in the hall at conference? Was it?
I wouldn't say it was on this. I mean, every member of the shadow cabinet was keen to stress their loyalties, and everyone name-checked Kemi at one point or another. But go beneath the surface in the chitter-chatter when you stood at the Midland Hotel bar or you're in a reception, there was lots of conversation about at what point do we essentially do a performance review of the leader and decide whether this is the person to take us into the next election. And mid-next year seems to be when everyone's thinking. But then there's an interesting scarring amongst the parliamentary party that I picked up on, that those who have been in Parliament before are scarred by Cameron to May, May to Boris, Boris to Liz, Liz to Rishi. There's a scarring that goes, we can't keep doing this. And those who weren't in Parliament, who were new in, have scarring because of the same churn, but from an outsider perspective. And I guess the test will be, well, two tests. One, can Kemi turn us around in the polls? Will her blitz of policy announcements have the effect that she hopes it will? How bad will May next year be? Next year be? And then the second one is, will that scarring be so deep that even if nothing changes, the parliamentary party go, well, we just can't change anything?
Yeah, and May of next year, of course, is the big local elections, and more importantly, the Scottish parliamentary elections and the Senate elections, where the Tories have big groups in both of those parliaments at the moment, but could well be struggling to form an official group. But
don't forget, those elections may well be bigger than historically because of some of the elections that were cancelled this year because of proposed local government reelection. So it's not even just a normal cycle. There are areas of the country that wouldn't have been due to have elections next year, but now will, but under boundaries that, and this was, the cynic said, partly why Labour might be doing this is because there's no historical comparison. No one can say, oh, well, you did control this and now you've lost it, or this, because they're entirely new structures that are being created.
I mean, if the polls are true, we could come out of those locals and, who knows what happens. A week is a long day in politics and all the rest of it. A week is a long day, long time in politics, not a long day. A week is a very long day. You could come out of those elections next May with both the leader of the governing party and the leader of the principal opposition party in a terrible position within their own parties, which would be unprecedented, right? Because ordinarily, if the government does badly, the opposition's done well by default, right? No, it's I just wonder whether, as well, is there a kind of realization, perhaps, that it almost doesn't matter who's the leader at the moment. Do any of us really, whether we personally think Kemi was the answer or not, and I personally was not very convinced of that, I don't think it would make, if I'm being honest, would it have made much difference if it was a different person at the moment? I mean, there must be some realization amongst party members that, the issues are more than the personality of the leader at the moment, right?
Yeah, and all the polling basically says that, both the polling that's taken place over the last 12, 18 months and some of the, everyone likes to do exclusive polling at Party Conference. All the polling that was released at Party Conference basically said, it doesn't matter. The media like to hype up Robert Jenrick as the obvious successor, and I have a lot of time for Rob and some of the things he's said. But the polling actually says, doesn't matter. because the public are less interested. The only person who polls slightly higher is Penny Mordaunt, who's not an MP and so can't lead the party anywhere. And I don't know how much of that is because she's not there. So she is a bit freer and that does give you a more relaxed approach when you're on the media, as she is quite a lot now.
Is there much eye on the? I mean, we've talked before about we have to put a candidate. The Tory Party have to put a candidate in all of these parliamentary seats. They have to find good candidates, people who would make good MPs, people who can campaign, people who will work hard and
Ollie,
take on the
I'm not
values of the
interested.
party.
Stop talking about me. I'm not going to stand again.
Yeah.
Stop begging
Which
me.
is
It's embarrassing.
not something Andrew needs to worry about happening to him. But I normally associate conferences being absolutely chock full of people who have, as we all had in previous times, ambitions to become MPs. How much of an eye is on starting to think about selecting people, and was it full of people who were trying to make connections and learn and find a route to becoming candidates?
Yeah. I mean, my experience is exactly the same as yours, that basically Parliament is where, conference is where those who want to be in Parliament show their credentials, stand up and do member debates and speeches where they can, and they network like hell. I got the sense the party is very keen that people start applying for the parliamentary list, but people and members are less decided about whether that's a decision they want to make now, including lots of people who lost the election in 2024 going, I need to focus on my life and I will make a decision at some point, but I don't know when that decision will be made. And I think part of the challenge with that as a party is they've not said when they want people to apply. Normally you'd set a deadline and say, well, we want to plan, and so we want you to have made a decision by this date, but that doesn't exist. So everyone is deferring the decision, and at some point that will start to have a real world impact on the party machine.
This will be confusing to many in Canadian politics to think that you'd pick a candidate for a seat years before the election, because it's kind of something I find very bizarre in Canada, how that doesn't really happen. But for those people, these young, bright things who run around trying to ingratiate themselves through various means, people try and get themselves up the candidates list in a whole range of interesting and varied ways. Certainly worked for me. That's not true.
It's long been something that many people have wondered. How did Andrew become a member of the UK Parliament?
Quite
for so long.
For so long, with such a large share of the vote. Thank you for mentioning the fact that I did indeed leave Parliament having won on 72% of the vote, one of the best results in the country for a Conservative MP. But moving swiftly on from my brilliance, you have to believe, though, that you have a chance of becoming an MP. And the problem at the moment is, ordinarily in opposition, it's like, right, okay, I want to get myself on the candidates list so I can put myself forward for the 10, 20, 30 seats that Labour narrowly won, that are definitely going to be bankers for us being in contention next time just because of the natural cycle of things. But actually, you're looking at the 120 Conservative MPs we've got now, and a good 60 of those or more, if you believe the polls, may themselves not be there.
Yeah.
The next election. So I kind of like, it's, and you need that. You kind of, parties exist. Like, the life of a party really are the people who are desperate to want to be the next generation of MPs. Right? That is the life of a party. Those are the people who turn up at conference, do all the necessary, go to all the campaign days, make themselves known, or try to. I mean, not everybody, because some people who end up in Parliament, it's inexplicable how they got there, and they didn't lift a finger for the party, and then they end up being senior members of the cabinet. But anyway, I'm moving on. But that is really your lifeblood, right? The people who want to be.
Yeah.
But to have that, you kind of have to believe, right? And it doesn't sound to me like, realistically, there were that many people at conference, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, who really believed that the Conservative Party is in contention to be the party of government anytime soon, right? So, and then you end up potentially in a death spiral, right? Because if you don't have that generation of people who really believe, then kind of what is the future of a party?
Yeah, the one counter is, at every conference I've been to before this, there's been an almost party-like atmosphere. The receptions were fun. There was tons of people there, basically just to socialise and have a lot of fun. This did feel more serious. It did feel like the people who had bothered to spend the money and give up the time to go wanted to figure out if the party was serious about trying to get back to power, in whether that takes 4 years or 14 years or 40 years, it was more like that. But just on the candidates, I had a conversation with a current MP, a good friend of yours, Andrew, and we said part of the structure of the party is you need an ability to, if you find the very best people that you go, you would be a brilliant Chancellor of the Exchequer or a brilliant foreign, the people that you really need in Parliament to form the best government. You need to have a number of seats where you can go, these are the seats we will put you in, because we know that you're a little bit more secure if you're in those seats. And those seats don't exist for us anymore. Yeah. There's almost no seat where if we found someone and you went, right, okay, we're on the journey to rebuild. We've barely got enough MPs that if every current MP survived the next election and we somehow formed a majority, almost all of them would have to form the government. So essentially what you're saying is, well, we're going to have to bring in new people who will be fresh into Parliament, which is what Labour did, brought fresh people into Parliament and immediately elevated them into government. And that's what Reform are talking about as well. But we just can't pinpoint the geographic places where we could put them and go, here's where you want to be. And then you compound that by going, there are too many, it might be former MPs who lost their seat in 2024 going, I want to stand again, but I only want to stand in a safe seat. And you go, right, well, where? Where is that now?
I mean, ordinarily you'd look at the home counties or you'd look at Essex, right? Well, the home counties, we've kind of lost large chunks of that to the Liberals. And Essex, I mean, I think it was Andrew Rosendale, the MP for Romford, who this week was saying he could see a situation in which every seat in Essex goes Reform.
Yeah. And you look at Mel Stride, he's the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, so someone that we, as a party, should be looking to going, you are amongst the most serious politicians. We would trust you to steward the economy and given the strapline of the conference was stronger economy, and we know we need to really be trusting that. Mel's majority is, I think it's 60 or 61. So even for those very high profile positions that we're currently saying you would be one of the most senior people, they're in very precarious territory. And I don't know how that filters through to a general election and us being able to credibly say, here's the people that we will put into government to form a government for you to enact the policies that we're asking you to support. That's a big
talking about through into campaigning as well.
Yeah. We're coming up with policies that we think are the policies that the public want, that we think are the solutions, but we also need we talk about trust. We need them to trust the policies that we're doing, but we need them to trust that we will have the people who can grip the departments and actually then do it. And I don't know how we overcome that hurdle now, given the low point we're at.
I think that's a really, really good point. You put that so clearly. And all three of us would have had help. I certainly did have help during election campaigns as well. And that's just, everyone's going to have to be so much more inward focused on their own constituencies. And it was like that in 2024. Like, people were not breaking away from what historically would have been seen as safe seats to come to more marginal seats to help to deliver leaflets and knock on doors and get the voters to go out and vote on polling day, because they were well aware that they had to put all their efforts into their own areas. And over the whole country, that has a massive effect on getting people morale, elected.
It does affect morale, right? If you don't have people coming and doing visits, because some people will just turn out because the leader's coming, a senior person's coming. But it all paints a very depressing picture in many ways, of which I suppose, to continue the depressing theme, if you're a Conservative anyway, was there much chatter about further defections then? Any gossip you picked up on who's going?
No, interestingly, I don't know if it was yesterday or Monday, Reform announced in the morning I think it was yesterday, because I think they timed it to be on the same day as Robert Jenrick's speech. Reform announced 20 Conservative councillors defected to Reform, and it got almost no pickup. It's almost now been baked into the media's view, the public's view, and the internal party view that we're just going to get defections. That is just where we are in the cycle. And my own personal view, and this was definitely reflected by most people I spoke to, they're welcome to go. If you're not in it because you believe in the Conservative Party and the values and the principles it stands for, then fine, go. But most of the people that seem to be going, from what I know of them, certainly the ones around my neck of the woods, they're the people that I would say they're relatively lazy, they don't work, and they want an easy ride. And they've probably looked at the polls and gone, well, you look like a better party for me to attach my name to. That's fine if that's why you're in politics, because you think, you've got a God-given right to be a politician. Fine, go to the party that's riding high in the polls. But I do think, if I was in Reform headquarters, I'd be really worried about the idea that we are just looking like a party receiving the tainted wood of other parties, whether that's the Conservative Party or Labour. They've had a couple from Labour. Do you really want to be known as the political party that's just made up of people who don't have the bottle to stick with a difficult circumstance? Because, even in the scenario that Reform win a general election, they're going to have tough times. And Nigel Farage and his crew are going to have to be confident that the people they bring into Parliament are capable of weathering that storm.
It does make you wonder as well if there are people who Reform say no to. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that there are those who would wish to go over, who they don't think it's the right thing for their party.
I mean, I've spoken to a few folks in Reform and said, you should be very careful about some of these folks, about whether you want them, because they didn't add a great deal to the Conservative Party. Many of them, I don't really know why they're in politics. I don't mean the ones who've defected so far. I mean, people who I think could well. I'm like, they didn't add anything. They were nothing but trouble. So why would their behaviour change? If they come over to you, you'll just have the same problems in a year or two's time, because they'll end up falling out with you because they managed to fall out with everyone. And we shall see how many more they take.
The question for them is, are they doing it because they like the headline of, the Conservative Party is in decline and the big names are going? And if that's what you're looking for, then you will take some people that you go, well, look, you're not going to have a future in our party. And I think of people like Nadine Dorris, right, who you go, ideologically, she spearheaded a bill that Reform seemed to have a massive problem with, the Online Safety Act. But if they're looking at it going, well, yes, okay, we don't agree with most of what you did when you were in the cabinet, but it allows us to say another former cabinet minister has defected from Conservative. I can kind of see some of their logic, but I'm not sure you'd keep putting that person on the news given the fundamental ideological difference.
Yeah, and if you look at the polling, their most accessible voter base is a Conservative voters, right? People who voted Conservative in 2019, 2012. Some of those people will have been Labour voters in the past. We know, particularly from 19, obviously from 19. But that's their most accessible voter base. A little bit of Labour, but most Labour defectors are going to other parties, right? As far as I can see in the polling. So maybe it's just any Tory that will come over is great for that message. You don't really care because it's, they're all sending the message that those guys are over. If you're one of them, you have to come to us. So maybe it's worth the risk, it's worth the punt, because, at the end of the day, you don't have to, if you get into government, you don't have to give them anything or reward them with any jobs, or, they've served their purpose, but we shall see.
We've now gone over our time, so I think,
we have.
Can I hand over to you, Andrew, to give a very gushing, massive thank you to Antony for being such a brilliant guest?
You can. There's just one final question, which is obviously of every conference, is who was seen going into whose hotel room at the Midland or whichever the conference hotel is, who wouldn't have been expected to go in that room? Because that's always the, for people who don't know party conference, that's always the tittle tattle, like what political journalists love. There's often a bit of a scandal after about who was seen going, well, you get back to Westminster, it's all, well, Antony was seen going into Holly's room at 3 a.m, and, they're definitely not,
Well, although let's be fair, Antony and I were living together at the time as flatmates. So wouldn't be too surprising, would it?
And someone has to keep that hair looking so good, Holly. So,
that is true. That is true. Well, Antony's a wonderful cook as well. So not to say that we pulled our MP's allowances to get a flat together just for the cooking, but he was a wonderful cook. Do you remember there, Antony, all those mice in the flat? We had terrible mice. I think people think it's glamorous being an MP. It really wasn't, was it?
Or in central London.
To and eat it. The flat I used to join you in.
We put you on the sofa that they'd adopted as their home.
Oh, that's disgusting.
It was gross. It was awful. But yeah. So Anthony, back to the important question, the gossip. Are you aware? Maybe perhaps change the names, or don't change them.
Was there any good gossip?
I actually don't think there was. Yeah, I mean, I'll text you some names later. I don't think so. The Midland was notably quieter. And the
Right.
Midland, I mean, for those who don't know, the Midland is the official party hotel. It's attached to the conference venue. It's in the secure zone, so it's where the party leader stays and the shadow cabinet. And anyone who wants to be with those people, but it costs a fortune, and I don't think it was full. Or if it was, I mean, you'll remember, Andrew, going into the Midland bar during party conference, and it was packed to the rafters, and you can't move, and it takes you 20 minutes to get a drink. You could walk up to the bar and get a drink whenever you wanted.
I mean, I think, never mind all those other words and fancy words you used about the party and policy and all that, the thing that tells me the Tory party is on life support is the fact that there wasn't even good gossip about people going into other people's hotel rooms at very strange hours of the evening and being spotted by political journalists and or other colleagues. That, to me, is the most potentially dangerous thing for the Conservative Party. If the Conservative Party has stopped giving good gossip, then that really is a sign the party's in trouble.
Well, the only other thing we should mention about party conference is some of the journalists had to leave on the Tuesday night because unusually, and this never happens historically, the Prime Minister decided to steal today's thunder, and today is Wednesday when Kemi's giving her speech, by going on a trade delegation to India. And traditionally, you would always avoid, as the Prime Minister, you'd avoid trying to take a headline from a rival party leader. So a decent number of the senior journalists have already left the conference.
Yeah, I mean, that was always the unwritten rule, like you don't interfere with each other's conferences. You leave everyone to have their week.
I think we did do it to Jeremy Corbyn one year, didn't we?
Yeah, I think that's why I think probably and this is the problem when people do it, they think, oh, it's really funny. And then when it happens to them, it's like, oh, this is why these rules exist so that we don't screw each other, because you screw them once, they'll screw you back. Talking of which, gossip. Anyway, look, it was nice to have the three of us back because we did all serve together on the HS2 hybrid bill brackets, Crewe to Manchester, close brackets, select committee, of which I was ably chaired by myself. And we spent a lot of time together listening to some very interesting arguments around the hair-like cask salt deposits of Cheshire. The salt plains, which I will forevermore be thankful and grateful for, mainly because I was getting paid to be the chair of the committee, whereas Antony and Holly, because they were just good friends of mine, agreed to come and serve on it because nobody else would. And we actually had fun, right? It was fun. It was great times.
And sometimes it was good to spend time with Antony. I always enjoyed spending time with Antony, who really brought a sense of professionalism and class to the committee.
And I think, Holly, I've got to say, you've chaired this podcast so well. I almost wish you'd been chairing the committee.
We often used to talk about how I should be chairing the committee.
When I used to tell people to stop talking and they'd just carry on talking, I'd be like, no, you're over your time. Instead of just ignore me. And you two would text me saying, nobody respects you. The clerks don't respect you. HS2 don't respect you. The members of the public
barristers don't respect you.
Yeah, it really made me feel great in the chair.
I hope they're all listening to this podcast, nodding along.
Oh yeah, because I would literally get these messages from you saying like they've just ignored you, they're not listening, they don't respect you either. And I'm reading this to the chair, I go, yes. Anyway, I think I have asked you to bring your comments to a close. But anyway, look, it's like getting the band back together because it wasn't 2 years ago nearly since we were on that, 18 months, whatever. But the thing I think about when I look at the three of us is how ageless we are, because I think in many ways we look better than when we were on that committee together.
Anthony's aging backwards. I want to know what's happening for Antony.
Yeah, and better than when we were all in Parliament together. So I think being an MP is very bad for your health, right? That's the one thing we could all agree on.
I did have a running tally whilst I was walking around the conference of how many times people told me I looked amazing.
Yeah, and I think you texted me almost every one of those times to tell me, Antony. So thank you for that.
You also sent us pictures of yourself at conference, which were pictures just of you, which is like, that's your way of saying, hey, I've lost however many pounds, but look at me.
I think one of the ones I sent you was me with a tractor, which obviously we will remember the symbolic importance of tractors in politics.
Be careful. Somebody needs to go and Google that now, right? Searching.
Yeah, we won't go any further. We will go no further with that.
Let's just say the tractor that our colleague was searching that got him in trouble and has forced him to resign from Parliament was called a dominator. And it brought up all sorts of other... People can go and Google that. This is the thing when I explain to Canadians, like, you just don't, in politics, like, just nothing quite hits like British politics, right? Because it's like...
Just a doubt I'm not that colleague.
No, you were not the colleague who was accidentally Google searching dominator tractors, which brought up different sorts of images, which then resulted in you having to resign from Parliament. Anyway, on that bombshell, Anthony, it's been lovely having you.
Thanks very much.
It's been lovely having the band back together. The three of us do meet up regularly still, so which is always very nice. But this was an added joy because having you as our roving reporter meant that Holly and I didn't have to endure the horror or pain of going to conference. So thank you for that.
It's
Thank
a
you, Anthony.
sacrifice I was willing to make.
Thank you so much.
From our point of view, Holly, I think this has worked better without Joseph.
Well, we're yet to discover if this has actually been recording or not. So we shall see.
Yeah, we better stop now. And then what we do is when we first stop, we have to remember not to leave, don't we, until it's uploaded.
We
So
do.
don't
Well,
leave
let's say
until
goodbye
it's
to
uploaded.
everyone and then I'll stop recording, but we'll say bye.
Yeah, 'cause then we do
Thanks,
that. I just
everyone.
remember these
See you
things.
next week. Take care.
Love you all. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anthony.
Bye.